the death of King Viserys II in 172 AC, at the age of 50, only 2 years into his reign, Aegon, the fourth of his name, came at last to the throne that he had coveted as a boy. While Aegon had always aspired to be king, given the line of succession, it did seem very unlikely that he would ever have the chance to take the throne. It took a series of several unfortunate events and deaths for the crown to fall to King Viserys, and thus Aegon. The new king had been comely in his youth, as women flocked to him. His sudden rise in status only made him more attractive to the ladies at court. He was very skilled with a lance and sword, a man who loved to hunt and hawk and dance. He was the brightest prince at court in a generation, and was admired for his wit, and was considered to be funny by all accounts, even managing to make the court full laugh at his jests. But the new king had one overriding issue that would define his reign. He had one great flaw: he could not rule himself in the slightest. His position created this flaw, but also fed it and made it worse. Of all of his issues, by far the worst was his lusts and his gluttony, his desires. They all controlled him utterly. Even as a boy, the warning signs were there, but all those around him had assumed he would thus grow out of these issues. But no, as he got older, they only evolved and worsened as a result. In the end, it is said, many within his family tried to encourage the young Prince Aegon away from those flawed aspects of his personality, but to no avail. Thus, there were many who were rightly worried as King Aegon IV was seated upon the Iron Throne. They were soon proven right, as his misrule began with small acts of pleasure, but in time his appetites knew no bounds, and his corruption led to acts that haunted the realm for generations, and in a way the House Targaryen could never recover from. Some learned men have argued that the actions of the unworthy king directly contributed to the downfall of House Targaryen, as much as the Dance of the Dragons itself. Perhaps even more so. Maester Caith writes in his Tome of Four Kings that King Aenys was weak, Maegor was cruel, and King Aegon II was grasping. But no king before or after would practice so many willful misrules as King Aegon IV. King Aegon soon began to fill his court with men chosen not for their nobility, honesty or wisdom, as a good king would, but for their ability to amuse and flatter him. While good and noble men were turned away from his service, he became surrounded by vipers and rats, each out for their own interests. And as you would expect with King Aegon IV, the women of his court were largely those who did the same, letting him slake his lusts upon them. Many less scrupulous lords, from destitute or poorer houses, sent daughters to court with the specific aim of catching the king's eye, and thus his favour, and with it might come position, power, wealth, and in many cases, bastards. Even among the more ancient and great houses of Westeros, his will would not go unchecked as he tested his power by playing them against each other or seeing how far he could push a lord. On a whim, he would often take from one noble house, seemingly at random, to give to another, as he did when he casually appropriated the great hills called the Teats from the Brackens and gifted them to the Blackwoods. The Brackens and Blackwoods had been fighting each other for years, and while peace between them would never last, it was still a peace. The actions of King Aegon IV would only relight the flames of hatred between the two houses, and one must wonder how many men and women died in the Riverlands thanks to the infighting caused by a king's seamlessly thoughtless and random decision. For the sake of his desires, he gave away priceless treasures of value beyond anyone could imagine. Relics and items at the very heart of House Targaryen, as he did when he granted his hand, Lord Butterwell, a dragon's egg. While there was no hope of hatching the egg, the symbolic meaning to it, for the Dragon Lords of Valyria, was more than any gold could ever buy. He gave away such a rare possession, not in return for anything of true value to anyone other than Aegon himself. He gave it away for access to all three of Butterwell's young daughters. The trading of the symbology of House Targaryen was something so sordid, sent a message across Westeros about the kind of man this king would be and how far House Targaryen had fallen. He even began to interfere with inheritance rights of many houses, seemingly at random. he deprived men of their rightful inheritance when he desired their wealth for himself, as rumours claim he did following the death of Lord Plum upon his wedding day to his cousin Princess Helena. Within weeks of coming to the throne, people began to see the kind of king King Aegon would be, and things would only get worse as the years passed. If only they could have foreseen at this time how truly bad things were going to become over the reign of Aegon the Unworthy. For the small folk of Westeros, the reign of Aegon the Unworthy, King Aegon IV, might have, and surely has been, a source of much gossip and amusement. The small folk love nothing more than scandal, and the depravity of those who rule over them. But the lords of the realm, who did not stay at the lecherous court of King Aegon IV, and who did not wish to have the king make free with their daughters at will, he might have seemed strong and decisive, frivolous, but largely harmless. His focus was solely on his own pleasures. Therefore, what was the fear of this king, as long as he gets what he wants? But for those ambitious lords who dared enter his court or attempt to gain access to his inner circle, King Aegon was to be too mercurial, too greedy, and too cruel, to be anything but dangerous, not just to himself, but to his family, his lords, and of course Westeros itself. It is said of King Aegon that he never slept alone, and he did not count a night complete until he had been with a woman. His carnal lusts were sustained by all manner of women, from the highest born of princesses to the meanest working women of King's Landing, and he seemed to make no difference between them. It is said that many of the whores of King's Landing saw Aegon as a means to advance themselves, as surely he paid well, for he was a king. Some even hoped for a bastard to be born to them, believing bearing a royal bastard would allow them perhaps comfortable life with the support of the crown. Many wished to believe this. How much of that came true is not known. In his last years, Aegon claimed he had slept with at least 900 women, but the truth is that exact number eluded him, but something close to it would not be a surprise at all. Of those women, however, it is said he only truly loved 9 of them. Many have gone on to question how one truly loves 9 women at effectively the same time, but it must be recalled Aegon was not a normal man, and his views of women and love were very warped. His true wife, Queen Naerys, his sister, was not counted among the 9 he claimed to love. If anything, his relationship with Naerys was hardly even that. The 9 mistresses came from near and far, and some gave him children, but each and every one, save the last, was dismissed when he grew weary of her. Thus, many of these base-born children were mostly forgotten and neglected by their father. But Aegon made one vital error in his conquests, and he chose a woman too close to simply dismiss and send away. One of those natural children came from Princess Daemon the Defiant in the year 170 AC, during the reign of his uncle, the religious zealot, King Baelor the Blessed. Due to the mother of this child being the sister of the king, he could not simply send her away as he might have wished. The son born to Daena in the Maiden Vault in 170 AC was given the name Daemon after his grandfather, Prince Daemon the Rogue Prince. Given the location of his birth, given the tradition of named base-born children in Westeros, the prince was given the name Waters. And Waters it would remain for the early part of his life. It is said that Prince Daemon had been the wonder and the terror of his age, and in later days, after the events that are to follow, that this should have been seen as a warning of what the boy would become, and the bloody terror he would unleash on the 7 kingdoms, causing the near ruin of House Targaryen. Or, that's as some historians would put it. There are of course those out there who would state the exact opposite. At the time of the babe's birth, Daena refused to name the father, even claiming that he was nothing but a common man. But even then, within court, in hushed corridors and dark corners, the men and women of the Red Keep, both high and low born, whispered, and it was almost all but accepted as fact, despite little proof that the then Prince Aegon Targaryen was indeed Daemon's father. In later years, it would be speculated by maesters at the Citadel that perhaps Aegon's father, the then Prince Viserys, later King Viserys II, who was then serving as Hand of the King, worked to suppress the tale of Daemon's parentage, given the treacherous political situation and the fanatical devotion to the faith of the king. Daemon was raised at the Red Keep. This handsome youth was given the instruction of the wisest maesters and the best master-at-arms at court, including the likes of Sir Quinton Ball, the fiery knight called Fireball. He loved nothing better than deeds of arms, and excellent at them he was, and many saw in him a warrior who would one day be another Aemon the Dragonknight. King Aegon knighted Daemon in his 12th year when he won a squire's tourney, thereby making him the youngest knight ever made in the times of the Targaryen kings, surpassing the record holder at the time, King Maegor I, Maegor the Cruel, and shocked his court, kin, and council members by bestowing upon the boy the sword of Aegon the Conqueror, Blackfyre, as well as lands and other honours. Daemon took the name Blackfyre thereafter and used his own reverse Targaryen sigil as his own, as a tradition for highborn bastards. Given his base-born son the Sword of Kings might not have seemed a huge issue to King Aegon IV when he bestowed it upon the young man, by giving him the very Sword of the Conqueror. The sword borne by every Targaryen king would later be a huge factor in the bloody events that were to come. Queen Naerys was the only true wife of King Aegon IV The Unworthy. Naerys had the traditional Targaryen looks, a fine and delicate beauty, almost described as unworldly. She was slender and small, with big purple eyes and fine, pale porcelain skin. She dressed well, but simply, and seldom wore her crown or any other jewellery. Though she had the silver gold hair of the Targaryens, she often bound it beneath a hairnet or concealed it beneath a cowl. As a person, it is said that Naerys was pious, gentle and frail. While she did her duty and married her brother, Prince Aegon, it was very much against her will, with many historians claiming she would much rather have wed her other brother, Prince Aemon the Dragonknight, with Aemon too heartbroken by the marriage of Naerys to his elder brother. The truth about Aegon's relationship with his wife is she is perhaps the one woman that King Aegon bedded, in whom he took no pleasure, someone and something he saw as more of a chore, which only deepened Naerys' resentment towards her husband, given the kind of woman she was, being pious, gentle and frail. All of these things the king misliked in his women, with his type almost being wholly opposite to his wife. Needless to say, despite both parties' displeasure in it, Naerys did bear the king a child, a true-born son and heir. Over his life, King Aegon would father several bastards of the like of Daemon Blackfyre, but he would only ever have one living true-born son. While looking back at history, we could see how this could have been an issue, but it must be remembered King Aegon III was still alive and well, with the succession seemingly secure in his sons Daeron the Young Dragon and Baelor the Blessed. Thus, with Aegon so far down the line of succession, it really wouldn't have been an issue, even if he had a dozen base-born children. What would it matter? Regardless, they both went about their duty. Childbirth also proved a trial to Naerys. She was small and delicate, somewhat like the daughter of the old King Jaehaerys the Conciliator, Princess Daela, who sadly lost her life birthing Aemma Arryn, the wife of King Viserys I Targaryen, and thus the mother to Rhaenyra Targaryen, in 82 AC. Prince Daeron was born on the last day of 153 AC. Again, he bore the traditional Targaryen look of Valyria. It is said he was round-shouldered, with thin legs and a slight pot belly. He apparently had a kind, thoughtful face, with eyes with clear resolve and strength. Unlike his father, he was seen as wise and kind-hearted, not a warrior, but highly cultured and very much a scholar who liked to keep the company of learned men around him. During the reign of King Baelor the Blessed, when it became clear that he would father no children, and thus Aegon's father, Viserys, would become king, with Aegon thus becoming his heir. The birth of a son and heir to King Aegon IV in the form of Prince Daeron in 153 was a relief to all. When Aegon became his father's heir at the death of Baelor in 171 AC, Prince Daeron was already a man grown at the age of 18, despite the crown moving to another branch of House Targaryen. In doing so, again it would have seemed as if the succession was firm and secure. But if Targaryen history has taught us anything, it is that even if you have a competent, strong heir, the ideal Prince of Dragonstone, there is always the need for a spare, as who is to know what tragedies the gods might have in mind that could plague Westeros into more chaos, bloodshed and war. And herein was the issue. After Daeron's troubled birth in 153 AC, the Grand Maester named Olford warned that another pregnancy might very well kill Naerys. Naerys was said to address her brother thus: "I have done my duty to you, and given you an heir and a son. I beg you, let us live henceforth as brother and sister, and not husband and wife." We are told that Aegon replied, "That is what we are doing." Aegon continued to insist his sister perform her wifely duties for the rest of her life. Throughout the years, Naerys went through several more difficult pregnancies, despite Orford's warning that another pregnancy could very well kill her. In 161 AC, Naerys nearly died giving birth to twins, and the twins' death shortly after birth led King Baelor I Targaryen to fast for a moon's turn. Baelor also sent Naerys' husband, Aegon, to Braavos on a diplomatic mission after this pregnancy. Accounts at the time suggest it was an excuse to make sure Aegon left Naerys alone as she recovered from her difficult childbirth. Despite the warnings, Naerys would fall pregnant several times once Aegon had become king, with only one of those children surviving, a girl she called Daenerys, born in 172 AC, 19 years after the birth of her only trueborn sibling, Prince Daeron. Matters between Aegon and Naerys were inflamed further by Prince Aemon the Dragonknight, their brother, who had been inseparable from Naerys when they were young. Aegon's resentment of his noble, celebrated brother was plain for all to see, for the king delighted in slighting Aemon and Naerys both at every turn. Even after the Dragonknight died in his defence, and Queen Naerys perished in the childbed the year after, Aegon IV did little to honour their memory. In fact, he would slander them at every opportunity he could, even perpetuating the rumour that Aemon was in fact the true father of Prince Daeron, and not himself. Rumours such as this, regardless of their truth, would only work to fracture House Targaryen even more in the bloody years to come. In 172 AC, Naerys gave birth to a second set of twins. The boy was stillborn, but the girl, Princess Daenerys, survived. Yet again, this delivery caused Naerys to linger near death, and Aegon's hand of the king. Lord Bracken went as far to speak openly about marrying his own daughter, Barba, to Aegon. A fortnight before, she had given birth to yet another bastard of King Aegon, Aegor Rivers. Bracken's plan was to marry Barba to Aegon after Naerys' expected eventual death. However, Naerys eventually recovered, and the scandal caused Lord Bracken to be removed from his office. Prince Daeron and Aemon the Dragonknight forced Barba to leave with the infant Aegor for Stonehenge. In contrast to Barba, Aegon's next mistress, Melissa Blackwood, was actually befriended by Aemon, Daeron and Naerys, and they were on generally good terms with one another, which could not be said of many of Aegon's mistresses. During this time, one tale suggests that once disguised as a mystery knight, Prince Aemon once won a tourney after his brother Aegon had forbidden him to take part, because Aegon wanted to crown his mistress at that time as the Queen of Love and Beauty. After winning as the Knight of Tears, Aemon crowned Naerys as Queen of Love and Beauty instead, and the tale became legend and sung up and down the Seven Kingdoms. King Aegon IV's quarrels with Queen Naerys and Prince Aemon the Dragonknight only became worse after his son by Naerys, Prince Daeron, grew old enough to voice his own opinions, something that King Aegon quickly came to resent and punish the prince for. Maester Keith's Lives of Four Kings makes it plain and clear to the reader that the supposedly false accusations of the Queen's adultery, specifically with Prince Aemon, made by Sir Morgil Haswick, were in fact instigated by King Aegon himself, though at the time Aegon denied it. But there is enough evidence to suggest that it was indeed the king who sparked these rumours and ensured they were spread far and wide. Technically and legally, these claims against the Queen and the Dragonknight were disproven by Sir Morgil's death in the trial by combat against the Dragonknight himself. Despite this, Aegon still acted as if the claims were true, and the knowledge of these claims had become common among the court and small folk, thus meaning even though they had been proven false through trial by combat, there are still those bound to believe their validity, both at court and beyond. An anecdotal wise tale suggests there were even some that prayed that Prince Daeron was in fact Aemon's son, and not that of the fat, unworthy king, in the hopes that when Daeron did take the throne, he would fix the wrongs of King Aegon's rule. That these accusations towards Naerys and Aemon came at the same time as Aegon and Prince Daeron were quarrelling themselves over the king's unpopular plans to launch an unprovoked war against Dorne, who Westeros had been at peace with since the death of King Daeron I, the Young Dragon, and the intervention and peace deal worked out by King Baelor the Blessed. So in truth, it was surely no coincidence accusations to discredit his son came to light as the prince was firmly and loudly questioning his father's rule so publicly, something that Aegon was not accustomed to, being a man who often got what he wanted, when he wanted, with little or no fuss or objection. It was also the first but not last time that Aegon threatened to name one of his bastards as heir instead of Daeron, with the most likely option and most commonly touted option being Daemon Blackfyre. Despite Aegon feeling disrespect and hatred towards Aemon and Aegon's provocations, Aemon died honourably between 178 and 183 AC in his mid-40s, defending his brother and king against the assassination attempt of two brothers of House Targaryen, who sought revenge for the torture and execution of their brother, Sir Terence Tone. Queen Naerys never stopped grieving for Aemon, which only fanned the flames of the king's suspicion of Naerys and Aemon's relationship further. Naerys Targaryen herself died 1 year after her beloved Dragonknight, due to another ill-advised childbirth. The fate of this child is not known, but given there is no historical record of it, it can be assumed that the babe died during labour, or shortly after the king began to make barely veiled references to his son's illegitimacy, something he dared only do now because the Dragonknight was dead. His courtiers and hangers-on aped the king as these rumours spread. In the end, Aegon's attempt to blacken his brother and sister's name failed, as the story of Aemon and Naerys, whether it was true or not, did not become a cause for scandal, but one that even into the Baratheon era of Westeros, singers and poets regale patrons with, in inns up and down 7 kingdoms, and even in the free cities. Aemon the Dragonknight is remembered as a heroic figure, on par with the legends of the Age of Heroes, and his memory is greatly respected throughout Westeros. Where Aemon is remembered well, the king was always be dubbed the Unworthy. In the last years of the reign of King Aegon IV, his eldest trueborn son, Prince Daeron, proved the chief and most impassable obstacle to Aegon's constant and consistent misrule and abuse of his power. In a way, the prince was the only balance and check to his father's unpredictable will and dangerous decrees. Some lords of the realm clearly saw an opportunity in the increasingly corpulent, gluttonous king, who could be convinced to part with honours, offices and lands with the promise of pleasure. Men would send their daughters to court with this specific task in mind. Some got the rewards they sought, others failed in their task, while some went on to regret ever getting involved with Aegon altogether. Other lords, the few who were willing to publicly condemn the king's behaviour, began to flock to Prince Daeron despite all his threats and tasteless japes. The king never disowned his son. In fact, there's not any solid proof that he ever made a true attempt to do so, despite his public detraction of him, and claims that his father was really his late brother Aemon. Accounts differ as to why. There are some that suggest a shriveled, dark part of Aegon, deep inside, still knew honour, if not that, at the very least, shame. There may still be some of the promising boy that had been born to Viserys and Lara of Lys. If so, he never showed his true self, or any semblance of care, not in public, and reportedly not even in private. The likeliest cause as to why Aegon never acted, however, was that he knew that such an act would bring war to the realm once again, and war was not something King Aegon wished to deal with. War would be a distraction from what he truly loved, eating, drinking, and women. But in truth, there were more dangerous factors that Aegon had to consider. Daeron had allies, chief amongst them the Prince of Dorne, whose sister Maieria Martell Daeron had wed in the wake of his namesake, King Daeron I's ill-fated attempt to invade Dorne in 170. The pair would have their first child, a son named Baelor, soon after. This meant the House Martell would soon have their own blood on the Iron Throne, and would defend Daeron and his rights should Aegon try and remove him from the succession. Perhaps it was for this reason that Aegon turned his attention to Dorne, using the hatred for the Dornish that still burned in the Marches, the Stormlands and the Reach to reluctantly force some of Daeron's allies into action and use them against his most powerful supporters, the Dornish. Fortunately for the realm, the king's plans to invade Dorne in 174 AC proved a complete failure in every sense of the word. Though his grace, at great cost to the realm, had built a huge fleet, the biggest since before the Dance of the Dragons, thinking to succeed as Daemon the Young Dragon had done, by means of attacking through the Red Mountains and by sea. But this fleet was broken and scattered by storms on its way to Dorne, and hundreds of men and ships sunk to the bottom of the narrow sea. Some say if Aegon had been more patient and had waited for the right time of year, when the weather around the Shipbreaker Bay and the Stepstones was more favourable, then much of the fleet could have made it to the Dornish coast. But if there is one thing Aegon was not known to be, and that was a patient man. But his folly at sea and the sinking of his fleet was far from the greatest folly of Aegon IV's stillborn invasion of Dorne. Just as he had pumped enormous amounts of gold into the fleet, he did so with other projects, ones even his greatest supporters found foolish. For his grace had also turned to the dubious and infamous pyromancers of the ancient guild of alchemists. House Targaryen was never the same after the loss of their dragons in the wake of the dance, and many kings would try different methods to bring them back or replace that lost power. Aegon commanded the alchemists to build more dragons. Unlike the numerous attempts by his forebearers and predecessors to hatch the last remaining dragon eggs on Dragonstone, Aegon would try a new approach. He would build dragons. These wood and iron monstrosities, carved into the shape of dragons, were fitted with pumps that shot jets of wildfire. They might have perhaps been some use in a siege, being able to burn down the strongest castle gate and fire over the walls into the castle interior. But Aegon proposed to drag these devices up through the boneway, which is hard enough navigating on horseback and on foot, where there are places so steep that the Dornish have carved steps. But they did not even come that far, for the first of these dragons went up in flames in the Kingswood, far from the boneway. Given the nature and power of wildfire, soon all 7 were burning. Hundreds of men burned in those fires, along with almost a quarter of the Kingswood. After that, King Aegon gave up his ambition and never spoke of Dorne again. Perhaps because he could not be bothered to take the time to prepare a new plan, or maybe he finally listened to reason. Whatever the truth of the matter, peace between Dorne and the Iron Throne was maintained. Barely. If it had not been for the marriage of Daeron to Mariah, very little might have stopped King Aegon the Unworthy. In his youth, it should be said that King Aegon IV was said to be outwardly a comely and charming young man. Given his position and his looks, it is no surprise that from a young age he had the ambitious women at court falling at his feet to become his new mistress. However, once he became king, and he became consumed by his gluttony and power, the king became immensely overweight and in poor health. Towards the end of his life, it was a wonder he could even manage to walk. That's if you could call it walking. But even in this poor physical condition, King Aegon IV still found himself with the pick of the women as they still threw themselves at him willingly. Perhaps willingly is not the correct term, as many of these women were forced down this path by ambitious fathers or brothers who saw them as a way to advance their own position by being in the king's good graces. King Aegon never loved his wife, his sister, Queen Naerys, and had no feeling for 99% of the women he bedded. But in his own words, he did truly love 9. These 9 women are known as the 9 mistresses of King Aegon IV the Unworthy. The first of these mistresses was Lady Felaena Stokeworth. 10 years older than the king, Lady Felaena boasted to have made a man of him in 149 AC, when Aegon was 14 years of age, Felaena 24. When a Kingsguard knight found the pair abed together in 151, his father, Prince Viserys, wed Felaena to his master-at-arms, Lucas Lothston, and persuaded the king to name Lord Lothston Lord of Harrenhal, in order to remove Felaena from court and away from his son. It is claimed that Felaena was Aegon's first so-called love, and thus he bore some resentment towards his father for marrying her off and sending her away. However, over the next 2 years, Aegon frequented Harrenhal regularly. Felaena first came to court during the early years of the reign of King Aegon III, during which time she would sometimes play at dolls with the young Queen Jaehaera Targaryen. Unfortunately, Queen Jaehaera died in 133 AC, allegedly by suicide. Afterwards, the Maiden Days Ball was held at the Red Keep to find a new wife and queen for the king. Many maidens across Westeros came to King's Landing in the hopes of marrying the young king. Felaena was one of the many maidens who suffered what was called the Maiden Days Curse by being injured or scandalized after the ball was announced. In Felaena's case, she took a tumble down the serpentine steps of the Red Keep and broke her leg. According to Archmaester Gyldain, Lord Unwin Peake, the Hand of the King, may have engineered the fall to promote his own daughter as the king's second wife. Felaena returned to court at King's Landing when King Aegon IV named her husband as his Hand of the King. Felaena brought her daughter, Lady Jane Lothston, with her. Jane became Aegon's 8th mistress, and it was widely rumoured that Felaena and her daughter Jane shared the king's bed. However, Aegon soon gave Jane a pox he had caught from a whore he had seen after Lady Bethany Bracken's execution, and the Lothstons were all sent away from court again. Thankfully, Aegon had no children by Felaena, as there were some rumours that Jane was his own daughter, but there is no proof of this claim. The second of King Aegon IV's lovers was Magette, known as Merry Meg, a young and buxom wife of a blacksmith from Fairmarket. Whilst riding near Fairmarket in 155 AC, Aegon's horse threw a shoe, and when he sought out the local smith, he came to notice the man's young wife. He went on to buy her for 7 gold dragons and a threat of Sir Joffrey Staunton of the Kingsguard. Magette was installed in a house in King's Landing. It is said she and Aegon wed in a secret ceremony conducted by a mummer playing a septon. Magette gave the prince 4 children in as many years. Prince Viserys put an end to it, returning Magette to her husband and placing her daughters with the faith to be trained as scepters. Magette was beaten to death within a year by the blacksmith. Aegon and Merry Meg's daughters were called Alysanne, Lily, Willow, and Rosie. The third of Aegon's mistresses was Lady Cassella Vaith, the daughter of a Dornish lord. After the submission of Sunspear during the invasion of King Daemon I Targaryen, Aegon escorted the hostages that the king had gathered from the lords of Dorne back to King's Landing. Among them was Cassella Vaith, a willowy maid with green eyes and pale white blonde hair, whom Aegon ended up keeping hostage in his own chamber. When the Dornishmen revolted and murdered King Daeron, all the hostages were to be killed, and Aegon, by then bored of her, returned Cassella to her place with the other prisoners. However, the new king, Baelor the Blessed, pardoned all the hostages and personally took them back to Dorne. Cassella never wed, and in her old age was consumed by the delusion that she had been Aegon's one true love and that he would soon send for her. The pair had no children. Mistress number 4 was Balaguer Orthoris, smuggler, trader, and sometimes pirate, captain of the Willow Wind, born of a union between a Braavosi merchant's daughter and an envoy from the Summer Islands. After Queen Naerys fell pregnant and almost died in 161 AC, King Baelor sent Aegon to Braavos on a diplomatic mission. Accounts of the time suggest it was an excuse to make certain Aegon left Naerys alone as she recovered from a failed childbirth. There he met Balaguer. His affair with the woman continued for 10 years, though it was said that Balaguer had a husband in every port, and that Aegon was one of many. She gave birth to 3 children during the decade, 2 girls and a boy of doubtful paternity, Bellinora, Nara, and Balerion. The 5th mistress was Lady Barbara Bracken, the vicious dark-haired daughter of Lord Bracken of Stonehenge, and the companion to the 3 princesses in the Maiden Vault. With King Baelor's death in 171 AC and Viserys II's ascension to the throne, the princesses were once again permitted male company. Aegon, now Prince of Dragonstone and heir apparent, became entranced with the 16-year-old Barbara. On his own ascent in 172 AC, he named her father as Hand of the King and openly took her for his mistress. She bore him a bastard only a fortnight before another set of twins, a stillborn boy and a girl, Daenerys, who survived, were delivered by Queen Naerys. With the queen lingering near death, the Hand, Barbara's father, talked openly of wedding his daughter to the king, but after the queen's recovery, the scandal proved Barbara's undoing, as young Prince Daeron and his uncle Aemon the Dragonknight forced Aegon to send her and the bastard away. The boy, raised by the Brackens, was called Aegor Rivers, but in time he became known as Bitter Still. The 6th mistress was Lady Melissa Blackwood, known as being the best loved of the king's mistresses, both younger and prettier than Lady Barbara, albeit far less buxom, as well as more modest. Missy had a kind heart and generous nature that led even Queen Naerys herself, as well as the Dragonknight and Prince Daeron, to befriend her. When Barbara Bracken was heard to joke that Melissa was flat as a boy, King Aegon, who had previously renamed the hills known as the Mother's Teats after Barbara's Teats, named the mountains for Melissa instead, and granted them to House Blackwood. Members of House Bracken still refer to the hills as Barbara's Teats, while members of House Blackwoods still call them Missy's Teats. Melissa was King Aegon's mistress for 5 years, during which she gave birth to 3 children, 2 daughters, Maya and Gwenys, and a son, Brendan Rivers, also known as Bloodraven. Brendan would later be able to maintain a close relations at court due to the fact his mother had been well loved during her time there. Even after her dismissal, a statue of Melissa can be found in the Godswoods of Raven Tree Hall. The 7th mistress of Aegon was Lady Bethany Bracken, the younger sister of Lady Barbara. Bethany was groomed by her father and sister expressly to win the king's favour and displace Melissa Blackwood. In 177 AC, she caught Aegon's eye after he visited Stonehenge to see his bastard son, Aegor. By now, the king was fat and foul-tempered, but Bethany delighted him and he took her back with him to King's Landing. However, Bethany found his royal embrace distressing. For comfort, she turned to a knight of the King's Guard, Sir Terence Tone. The pair were discovered abed by Aegon himself in 178 AC. Sir Terence was tortured to death and both Lady Bethany and her father were executed. When Sir Terence's brother sought to revenge his death, Prince Aemon the Dragonknight was slain while defending his brother. The pair had no children. Mistress number 8, as noted prior, was Lady Jane Lothston, daughter of Lady Velena, the king's first mistress. Her father was Lucas Lothston, or perhaps even the king himself. Jane was brought to court by her mother in 178, when she was 14 years of age. Aegon had made Lord Lothston his new hand, and was said, but never proved, that he enjoyed both mother and daughter together in the same bed. He soon gave Jane a pox he caught from a whore he'd been seeing after Lady Bethany's execution, and the Lothstons were sent from court. Despite rumours that Jane was his own daughter, there is no proof of this, and is suggested to be a rumour started specifically to paint the king in the worst possible light, despite Aegon's reputation already being low. The final of King Aegon IV's mistresses was Serene of Lys, a Lyseni beauty from an ancient but impoverished line, brought to court by Lord John Hightower, the new hand of the king. Serene was the most beautiful of Aegon's mistresses, but she was also reputed to be a sorceress. She died giving birth to the last of the king's bastard children, a girl called Shiera Seastar, who became the greatest beauty in the 7 kingdoms, beloved of both her half-brothers, Aegor and Brendan, whose rivalry would ripen to hatred. The reign of King Aegon IV Targaryen, the unworthy monarch, came to an end in 184 AC, when King Aegon was 49 years of age. The view of many maesters is that his indulgent lifestyle took its toll on the king, and surely must have reduced his natural life expectancy greatly. For many, it was even a surprise he'd lived as long as he had, not just because of his physical condition, but because of the numerous and countless enemies he had made over his rule. Many look back in retrospect and wonder how it is not possible that he was never assassinated, as yes, many of the lords he quarrelled with were minor or of little note. There were those who did have powerful allies. It's a wonder that one of the many scorned former lovers of King Aegon never perhaps thought of killing him while sharing his bed. Even in his last years, the king's health prevented him from taking much of an active role in the rule of his kingdom, which in truth might have been a relief for his small council, and most of all his son, Prince Daeron. In his later life, King Aegon IV was grossly fat. Given his taste for fine food, wine and ale, and lots of it, he became so huge that eventually the king was barely able to even walk. When he did choose to exert the energy needed for such a task, he could not get up from his seat or bed without aid, let alone walk very far at all. Some maesters have looked back at the health of the king and have speculated that he possibly also could have had gout, which further hindered his mobility, and perhaps he even had diabetes. These numerous health issues only compounded the limited mobility of the king, only further enhancing the issues with the king's weight, meaning there was no hope of reversing the damage or improving Aegon's quality of life, even if he had wanted to. Given Aegon's poor health and physical condition and limited mobility, some even wondered and even japed how King Aegon's last mistress, Serene of Lys, the mother of Shiera Seastar, could ever have withstood his embrace long enough to get with child, and how the physical act could have even been possible. What is even more puzzling to many is that Serene was perhaps the most beautiful and desirable woman of her age. She could have easily had any man she chose, and for sure she had her pick of men, not just from Aegon's court, but from up and down the free cities. Like many of his mistresses, one must suspect she became his mistress for one reason: to progress herself and gain some form of power and influence. Whatever the woman's motives, for many it is hard to believe she would be attracted to the king, and in truth, we have no true way of knowing. King Aegon Targaryen, the fourth of his name, died a horrible slow death in 184 AC, 49 years of age. It is said at his death his body was so swollen and obese that he could no longer lift himself from her couch, his limbs rotting and stinking, and crawling with flesh worms. The Maesters claim they'd never seen the like of it before, and as far as records go, they have never seen the like of it since. Septons up and down the Seven Kingdoms declared it a judgment of the gods, and that Aegon's agonizing fate was a punishment for his numerous sins against the Seven. Even today, some Septons use King Aegon IV as an example of what can happen if you turn your back against the Seven and fall to lust and depravity. As is expected, Aegon was given milk with a poppy to try and dull his ever-growing pain, but his condition was so bad it could do little to dull the pain of his decaying body, and in truth little could be done for him while he rotted away in his bed, waiting for death. There are some claims with no true attributed sources that he may have even wished for death himself, but even in his pain, at the end of his life, King Aegon IV Targaryen was not done wreaking havoc upon Westeros. His family and its people, his last act before his death, all accounts agree, was to set out his last will and testament, and in it he had left the bitterest poison the realm had ever known, something that had never happened before, and something that King Aegon IV surely knew would cause bloodshed and chaos in its wake. As Aegon lay dying, he legitimized all of his natural children, from the most base-born, birthed to common women, to the great bastards, the sons and daughters born to him by women of noble blood, the likes of Daemon, Aegor, Bloodraven, and Shiera. Scores of his natural children had never actually been acknowledged, meaning the true number of them was hard to know, but Aegon's dying declaration meant nothing for them. For his acknowledged bastards, however, it meant a great deal and more, and for the realm, it meant blood and fire for 5 generations that would almost bring down the House of the Dragon, once and for all. King Aegon IV Targaryen, in truth, had an unknowable number of children, so many so that even Aegon himself could not even acknowledge them all. Most of these unacknowledged children were the ones often fathered on unknown common women and whores of no standing. The reality is, they could never prove Aegon was the father, even if they wanted to. But as we know well, Aegon also had many mistresses, most of whom had come from noble birth. Thus, it meant he had no choice but to acknowledge the children he fathered with them. Of his many children, these ones would go on to have a huge impact on the history of Westeros and House Targaryen, for good and ill. These men and women would be known to the history books as the Great Bastards. The first of the Great Bastards was born in 170 AC, a boy who would grow up to be Daemon the Blackfyre, born Daemon Waters. He was the son of Princess Daena Targaryen and King Aegon IV Targaryen, and was fathered during the reign of King Baelor the Blessed, during Daena's time in the Maiden Vault. Daemon would found House Blackfyre, named after the Targaryen Valyrian steel sword he was given by his father to much controversy. He would fight against his trueborn half-brother, King Daeron II, for the Iron Throne in the First Blackfyre Rebellion. Daemon was the first and greatest of the 5 Blackfyre pretenders. As a bastard of House Targaryen, Daemon bore the arms of House Targaryen with the colours reversed, a black 3-headed dragon on a red field. Thus he became known as the Black Dragon. He was tall and powerful, with broad shoulders, muscular arms, and a flat stomach. Being Targaryen on both sides, he had all the hallmarks of his house: and strong Targaryen features, with deep purple eyes and silver gold hair, which he wore long, flowing down to his shoulders in a silvery gold mane. He always went clean-shaven, with neither a beard nor a moustache. He was also apparently inhumanly beautiful. Daemon looked every inch a warrior, and many thought that he strongly resembled portraits of Aegon the Conqueror. Daemon matured into a man of considerable charm and strength, mastering all weapons of the battlefield, but with the sword Blackfyre in hand, he was said to fight like the warrior himself. He won friends easily, and women were drawn to him. The second of the great bastards was Aegon Rivers, frequently known as Bittersteel, the son of King Aegon IV by his fifth mistress, Lady Barbara Bracken. Aegon was the founder of a famed group of exiled sellswords, the Golden Company. In his personal arms, he combined the red stallion of House Bracken with black dragon wings from House Blackfyre on a golden field. Being half Targaryen, Aegon had purple eyes but black hair. As an adult, he had a close-cropped beard. He looked like a warrior, being lean, light and tall. Aegon's armour was well made, though plain-looking, with grey steel and black rings. On his helm was a horse head, with a horse's mane flowing behind. His shield displayed his personal sigil, a stallion with black dragon wings, on a golden field snorting fire from his nose. Aegon was angry all of his life, and was quickly irritated and offended. He did not smile, and he especially loathed his younger half-brother, Brynden Rivers, and especially Brendan's mother, Melissa Blackwood, who had replaced Aegon's mother, Barbara Bracken, as the king's mistress. Melissa Blackwood would birth 3 of the great bastards. It is speculated that a girl, Maya Rivers, was born in 172 or 173 AC, with her younger sister, Gwyneth Rivers, born 1 year later. Most history books don't tend to focus on the 2 daughters of Melissa, thanks to their younger brother, Brynden Rivers, who was born in 175 AC. Brynden was albino, and thus had milk-white skin, long white hair, and red eyes. On the right side of his face, he had a red wine-stained birthmark that extended from his throat up to his right cheek. The birthmark was apparently the reason why he was called Bloodraven, as it was said that it looked somewhat like a raven drawn in blood. Brynden was not as tall or muscular as his half-brothers, Daemon and Aegon, but he was considerably more cunning. Slightly under 6 feet tall, Brynden was thin and gaunt. He had a grim, forbidding aspect, and sharp, vaguely sinister features. He typically wore the colours of scarlet and smoke, and dark grey motted and streaked with black. For instance, one of his outfits included a scarlet tunic with black boots and a smoke-coloured cloak. Because of his skin's sensitivity to light, Bloodraven usually went about cloaked and hooded, which added to his sinister nature. He lost an eye during the first Blackfyre rebellion, and rarely covered the empty socket with a patch, preferring to display his scars and empty socket to the world. He wore his white hair straight and to his shoulders, with the front brushed forward to cover his missing eye. Although Brynden carried the Valyrian steel longsword Darksister and was a good swordsman, he was also an exceptional bowman who preferred to use his tall weirwood longbow. Brynden was rumoured to be a sinister sorcerer and spy master who effectively ruled the Seven Kingdoms with spies and spells, and known as Lord Bloodraven. A popular riddle, even into the Baratheon era of Westeros, says, how many eyes does Lord Bloodraven have? 1,000 eyes and 1. Shiera Seastar was the last of the great bastards of King Aegon IV Targaryen, born to his last mistress, Serenia of Lys, sometime between 178 and 184 AC. She was the known lover of Brynden Rivers, her half-brother, and she is said to have been the most beautiful woman of the Seven Kingdoms. Shiera was renowned as a beauty and seductress. She had a heart-shaped face and thick, curly Targaryen silver-gold hair that she wore long. Although she had 2 mismatched eyes, one dark blue, the other bright green, it was said that this defect only enhanced her beauty. When it came to her clothing, Shiera was fond of ivory and lace, with cloth of silver, but not cloth of gold, which she considered too vulgar. She was a great reader, and even at an early age spoke many languages, and maintained a large arcane library. She was also reputed to share her mother Serene's skills in the dark arts. Shiera was known to possess a heavy silver necklace with alternating star sapphires and emeralds that complemented her eyes. There is an argument that Aegon's children born to Belagir or Thoros should also be counted among the great bastards. Belagir was the daughter of a son of a Sea Lord of Braavos and the Summer Islander princess. However, we don't currently know if her parents were in fact married, and thus if Belagir herself can be counted as a noblewoman or not. Therefore, it is difficult to place her children with Aegon, Bellanora, Nara, and Balerion among the great bastards, as we do not know if Belagir was highborn or not. Plus the fact Belagir was not from Westeros adds to this idea. There is also rumours that Aegon was the true father of Viserys Plum, the son of his cousin Princess Aelena Targaryen and Ossifer Plum, who died consummating their marriage. If this turned out to be true, then Viserys Plum would be counted among the great bastards. Another rumour also claimed that Aegon had bastards with all 3 of Lord Butterwell's daughters, which again, if true, means they would also be part of this group.